It's official. Players Union and the NWSL have ratified the very first collective bargaining agreement in women's soccer history. Let's chat a little bit maybe about the time it all came to light in the middle of the night. The Players Association breaking the news a little bit on late evening ahead of the start of February 1, 10th year for NWSL, 8:30 p.m. Eastern on January 31st. The Players Association saying that they're going to go ahead and report to preseason on February 1. Just a week ago, exactly 7 days, the union put out a statement saying that they really wanted to have a CBA in place, that there were discussions about not reporting to preseason if the contract was not put in place. And then here we are 7 days later saying that they ratified and that they still needed approval at the moment to go ahead and have the first ever collective bargaining agreement in NWSL history. And then a really weird hour of time, right? A little bit of like sort of felt like in limbo because there wasn't necessarily a statement from the league at this point because there was this little verbiage within that people were fixated on that it's subject to approval, right? From
Mhm.
the WSL board. And I think folks were still almost waiting for another shoe to drop. But then just an hour later, the league put out a statement saying that, yes, the league and the PA have agreed to the first ever CBA, but it was still subject to just some legal things, a final approval from the NWSL Board of Governors. But it was an exciting evening, to say the least.
It was very exciting, and as this news unfolded, I think that's so important to touch on that. As this happened, there was like celebrations across the internet and across Twitter and in my living room, just celebrations for these players to be able to come to an agreement. And then it was the caveat of, okay, it's still subject to final approval by the NWSL Board of Governors. But the way that the Players Association put out this information, and then even when the NWSL ultimately put out this statement, it was almost like it's just a matter of time before they approve this. It's been over 400 meetings and negotiations between the Players Association and the board of directors for the league that have come to these conclusions, and really cutting it so close just the day before preseason. We know that based on social media and the players seeing them, most of them are already in market. A lot of them have reported to do their medical examinations this past few days, and today, February 1st, being the very first official day of preseason. So that means the players are in uniform, lacing up their boots and stepping onto the field. So any medical evaluations and screenings that need to be done have already happened. So a lot of players were in market and still kind of waiting with bated breath to see if this would get approved, if they could come to a conclusion. And I'm sure it happened earlier in the day. And by the time you can get it all written out and the nice graphics for Twitter, for the NWSL players Twitter, and you get it out there, it seems like for fans and for media that were just watching this unfold, that it was happening so quickly. But of course, on the other side of the coin, it does happen quickly, but then it's almost like a hurry up and wait situation. They had all these negotiations. They came to the conclusion. They submitted their final approval. And then it was like, okay, let's wait until we can announce this, until we do it correctly. And I think they did it very correctly, because my Twitter was blowing up at 8:45 last night. It was like winding down for bed for me. And I was like, nope, let's go. We got to fire up. We got to see what's going on. And it was a lot. And even in the initial tweets from the Players Association, they were putting out some of the details, some of their biggest celebrations that they were highlighting, which I thought that was so fun and so cool, because we've known that these conversations have been happening. And the latest that was reported on 7 days ago, exactly 1 week before preseason started, was that there were still details that were being ironed out, including free agency, including how long this CBA would last. That was stated a week ago by the Players Association, what details they were still trying to figure out. And so in this initial announcement, they touched on those details and they gave fans and players the answers.
Yeah, it was I think having that was lingering, I think, in the back of everybody's mind. The fact that there was a bit of a deadline that was put on things, at least on the Players Association side of things, right? Knowing that February 1st was literally the following day that this was the day. This was like a little bit of a decision day scenario for this to get done, knowing that if it wasn't taken care of in this night, that players were not going to report for preseason the following day. So I think there was a little bit, I don't want to say a lot of anxiety, but I'm sure that there was for some folks throughout January 31st, like wondering when it's going to happen, if it's going to happen. Is this going to be one of those midnight hour kind of breakthroughs? And it was in the evening, and thankfully it wasn't at the midnight hour. And then I know us here at Attacking Third, reporting that there were some things there coming into play. Right earlier that afternoon, I reported out there that things like free agency and things like contract terms were coming together, and those were some of the biggest hurdles that we've heard from players, and sort of wanting to come to life in this CBA. And you had to imagine that if those were two things that were sort of coming together and finding some agreements upon, that there was a really strong possibility that things were going to get hammered out. And luckily, that ended up being true. But you're correct. While we were watching it happen almost in real time, Lisa. It's like the players put out this statement, and then it was like a thread that they started putting together of some of the details within this newly ratified CBA, which will last through the next 5 years. So through the 2026 season, 160% increase in minimum salary, which is probably the biggest one, right, that they started out with. It's going to be bumped to $35,000 with a 4% year over year increase. So that raises the minimum salary by almost 60%, an average increase by more than 30% to 54,000 compared to the 2021 season. There's also some step ladder increases in 2022 salaries in order to protect players above the minimum in 2021. There's also going to be things like a 401k plan with matching contributions from the league beginning in 2023, and also minimum standards for housing stipends. And it's a lot. If it seems like a lot, those are big percentages for people. It is a lot. I mean, in terms of the NWSL release side of things, they cited exactly a lot of the primary terms that were agreed to. It's projected to require additional incremental investment by NWSL owners of nearly $100 million. And I think the biggest points of these that we've been chatting a little bit about throughout off seasons here is free agency, Lisa. And there's a little bit of a step ladder in this one in progress.
There is. I think free agency is something that players have been pushing for, and sources even told The Athletic that the league was hoping that it wouldn't take effect until 2024. However, in the CBA, it says that free agency is going to start in 2023 with players that have a minimum of 6 years of service, and then that number will drop in 2024. So free agency will be eligible for players with a minimum of 5 years of service playing in the league. And there's also restricted free agency starting in 2024 with players with 3 service years. And then I think that the free agency is fantastic for these players, but even the restricted free agency, which is similar to any other league, meaning a player can sign with a new team, however, but their current team can match that offer and keep them around. It's not set in stone yet. But this compromise in the CBA is something that was one of the decisions that probably came down to the last few days, and really hammering out those details of that, because the league didn't want free agency to start until 2024, and the CBA is starting in 2023 for those players that have given 6 years. So that's fantastic. Like, that is already turning a new stone in this CBA. And the CBA will last for 5 years through the 2026 season. So that's a deadline and a timeline that is really good, and obviously a compromise between both sides of this. There's also a caveat and an asterisk in this for waived players, because we've talked with players before and we've heard the stories that they get waived or they get traded, and it's like, okay, pick up and leave. You have to, you're out of your housing. You no longer have a salary, and get out of here. Give us back all of the clothes and get out. So it's In this CBA, it says that there's 4 weeks severance pay, plus 30 days of housing and health insurance for any player that is waived. And that 30 days and 4 weeks comparable to each other, but that does so much for a player. It allows them a chance to breathe after they've just been waived from their job. The fact that like they didn't have that before is mind blowing to me, that you could
Yeah.
just be waived, essentially fired from your job, not necessarily for cause, and that's it. You are just cut off completely from that moment forward. So I
Yeah.
think the free agency is huge, and then players getting waived and having a little bit of stability after that to find their footing and figure out what's next. They have 30 days with insurance as well, which for professional athletes, that's necessary.
No, that's huge. I think that was one of the biggest pieces of the details that were coming out that really struck me, just because of so many of the things that we've read that have been reported about players in the past and them being waived. Players who have come on here and talked about that, or in other spaces. 4 weeks severance pay and 30 days housing and health insurance is huge, considering that you're coming from a place where there was zero of that in existence. I think it goes right along. It's right in line with a lot of maybe some of the player safety initiatives that the Players Association was really sort of bargaining for at these tables. So that included the 4 week severance pays and housing, but also a bump in workers comp coverage, up to 6 months of paid mental health leave. That includes 8 weeks of parental leave, whether it's for birth or adoption, clean private nursing facilities for parents in NWSL, professional minimum staffing standards for healthcare professionals, and no more playing on fields that require substantial conversions to the dimensions of a soccer field. And that's big too, because there have
Yeah.
been moments in the past where there have not been ideal playing surfaces for the players of this league, in prior events or in prior facilities. We're talking about in the really, really early days too, and even as early as last season.
Yeah. I
Playing
mean,
in baseball fields or smaller collegiate type of fields. So that was a huge one, I think, as well.
that's another thing that I'm like, this shouldn't have to be clarified, but clearly it does, that they need to play on actual soccer fields, because although it has already been announced and already changed. Last year, Kansas City Current, their home field was Legends Field, and that was a baseball field, as well as OL Reign. They were playing in Cheney Stadium. Now, Kansas City has already announced that this season they will play in Children's Mercy Park, and OL Reign has already announced that they will be playing their home games in Lumen Field, which is the home of the Seahawks and the Sounders. But that wasn't the case last year, and it was a big difference. I mean, so many times when we watched games that Kansas City was playing at home at Legends Field, the dimensions were so small. The field was super bouncy, and the ball, you
Yeah.
could see it just watching the games. And talking with coaches and players before the matches, they said, hey, we are going to play at home at Kansas City. For Kansas City, that's an advantage for them. And for away teams coming in, they are at a disadvantage with how narrow the field is and how bouncy it is. So that's like a baseline that I feel like should have already been established. But right, like so many of these things, player safety should have already been established. But
Yeah.
the start of the 10th season of the NWSL, it's in writing, right? Ink to
Yeah.
paper, and there are signatures, and there's a CBA, thankfully. But there are so many small details of the CBA and the deals that are mind blowing, but so necessary.
And and that's part of why it's a big deal. And that's part of, honestly, quite frankly, why it feels that shocking. It wasn't, those substandards were allowed because the CBA wasn't in existence.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything that players or fans or casual fans or folks within the space could point to and say, this is not acceptable. Other than just doing the eye test and knowing the game of soccer and knowing that playing on a baseball field probably isn't ideal. We can even continue with using the Rays as example, using something like Memorial Field was a struggle for them for opposition to play on, and it wasn't ideal for Rain players themselves. It was often talked about as a place that was a difficult place to go in and play and win for multiple reasons, not just the dimensions, but just the overall surface. And that includes even the early days of Chicago Red Stars playing at Benedictine University, the early days of FC Kansas City. There was just a lot that was coming into play, but nothing in existence, nothing in place, nothing in writing to say that actually this is not acceptable. And that's part of the huge reason is why this is so important that now there is a contract in place. And to ask players to play on a playing field that has substantial dimensions is in breach of contract. So that's these are things that can be pointed to now. I do appreciate that even in some of the 2 hour window that took place last night between the players announcing this and then the league also uh, acknowledging it, was sort of their sign off, right, on this Twitter thread that they put to the players that came before us. We stand on your shoulders, and we hope we make you proud. That's significant, right? That's something that we've heard um, throughout the duration of these negotiations, especially I think mid-season when we started to see a lot of the reporting coming out about players from the past and their past experiences in these in certain environments throughout the league. Um, and then it's sort of the CBA negotiations almost they didn't completely change, but they started to sort of become this bigger, all-encompassing thing where it's like, yes, things like increase in pay, things like the concept of a free agency market, contract terms, like, yes, those were things that were being discussed and negotiated. But alongside that, things like ensuring player safety, ensuring that environments are, not abusive or toxic, right? These were all things that sort of like came and got pulled into these contract negotiations. We heard several times on this podcast when we had guests that player safety became the most important thing to sort of have in front of everything else going on within these negotiations for a potential CBA. And within that, knowing that they had all of these previous players and stories, former horror stories, really,
Mhm.
um, from players to sort of look at and sort of build on. I thought it was a very sincere touch to sort of sign off on some of the things and details that they were ratifying within this initial CBA.